Welcome back to the channel. We're doing a build overview today of my grandpa's 35 Ford. Just honestly a really special car to me. A lot of great memories. It's kind of one of those projects that came on really early in life, early in cars in general. It kind of had its challenges, of course, through the build and just navigating everything, doing a project at home on the weekends with your grandpa. But I'm so glad that it happened. And yeah, this is just a great car. I'm never gonna let this car get away from me. And it's right there with my Chevelle. It's like my Chevelle, my grandpa's 35. Those are just two really great cars. So I'm excited to share it with you. My grandpa bought this car. It was in pieces. It was a failed project from somebody else. Basically, they had big ambitions of putting the car together. Just never happened for him. So he bought it. There was a frame, maybe an old engine or something that didn't end up getting used. The body fenders had been poorly fixed, if you will. A lot of stuff we didn't use. And at the time, my grandpa and myself didn't even know totally what we were getting into by doing this. So it was a big learning experience, but it was a good experience. The frame was kind of the first thing we tackled. My grandpa wanted to keep a lot of like the originality of the car. So it's a stock frame, but we did some of like the hot rod upgrades. So it's got a split wishbone front end in it, which just allows the suspension to move a little more independently from the frame. That design was really poor. We also converted it to a Vega steering gear. Like 40 years ago, this was like what you did to these cars. And it's honestly what we did. So it's a little bit more of a traditional style build, some boxing on the frame, but just a stock frame. The rear end was like a chassis engineering rear leaf springs. So it's got dual rear leaf springs now, an 8.8-inch Ford rear end we pulled out of a Maverick at a junkyard. So an open driveline now, because originally this car had what was called a torque tube. And if you're not familiar with those, the torque tube is a direct connection, no U-joints, from the transmission all the way to the rear end. It's problematic for one. It just makes everything rigid. It doesn't allow the suspension to move as independently as it does with an open driveline. They're just really good upgrades without getting a new chassis, because this project was more about time and figuring out how to do it, because it was just our time and it was just on the weekends, versus a lot of the projects that we do now. Now we're paying a professional shop labor rates. So now we're buying a frame because labor makes sense. These guys are more efficient. Anyways, that's a whole different. Best way I can describe this car, driving it and stuff, is all it needs is maintenance. It just needs to be maintained because it's so pleasant and like nice to drive. We also put juice brakes on it, of course. So originally, Henry Ford was very adamant about sticking to mechanical brakes. Chevrolet and all these other companies had moved to juice brakes. He thought they were dangerous. He thought they would fail. Obviously, he was wrong because every single car in the world now has hydraulic brakes. But if you can believe it, there was linkage, literal linkage, run from the brake pedal, which on these cars, it actually goes through the toe board, which is known through cars all the way to through the 50s. It's a very different style than what we're used to seeing now. Those pedals would go down through the floor and they would push on bars all the way throughout the frame and linkage that would push on a lever that activates basically, I'm gonna say Carhartt material brake pads. So this is a 35-mile-an-hour car. That's just the truth. Not safe at all by today's standards. They just weren't going that fast. The roads were rough and that's just the way it was. So that needed to go, that needed to change. So everything's mounted under the floor still, but it's hydraulic. The engine is a Flathead. It's got like a Merc crank in it. It's like some upgrades. I was not involved with building the engine. My grandpa had another guy do it. It was like very specific to Flatheads. They're kind of finicky little engines. Once you get them right, they're great, but you have to get them right. You gotta work your way to that point a little bit. It's mated to a T5, a 5-speed transmission, which has got a bell housing adapter and stuff. Just a touch of modern drivetrain upgrades, stuff like that. But it's still, you know, it's still a manual. It's still a clutch. It's true to what it was as a standard car. The body is blue and the fenders are black, which is how these would have come originally. You can get different body colors, but all the fenders in this era were black. And my grandpa wanted to stick with that. I honestly at first wasn't totally game for it, but now like the overall aesthetic of the car with the white walls, the wires, black fenders, blue, it just really works. And I really like how oftentimes in some lights, the blue and the black, they almost look the same. I'm really a big fan of that. Like I really appreciate like when you have a two-tone that's just like super subtle and then you catch it in a certain light and you're like, oh shoot, this thing's actually blue. The fenders were just completely trashed. I mean, the ones that came with the car. It's a completely steel car, which a lot of these cars, when they're being restored, the fenders are often hammered, so people go to fiberglass. We wanted to really stick with steel, so it's all steel. that was a big part of this. So these are actually different fenders. A lot of this still had to be repaired. My grandpa found a different set of fenders. I had to shape a lot of pieces. A lot of panels were made. I'll walk around the car and show you all the areas that had to be cut apart and welded back together. Some of them were purchased. A lot of it had to be handmade. I remember having to replace this whole back section of this fender. I had to replace, I believe, this front corner. The hood was in pretty good shape, just minor repairs. I know for sure that I replaced this lower part of the cowl side on both sides. I replaced the lower part of the quarter panel on both sides. I replaced this front section of the fender. I had to do some repair work in this area where the bracket comes in. It's just like, they're notorious, they pile up with debris and material. I had to replace this entire back tail panel section, same thing. Material gets down kind of behind the trunk in what they call the tool tray, because that's actually where, like, traditionally you would store your tools for the car. So that whole tool tray was rotted out, so I had to replace all that. This fender has a whole story in itself. So I took, and you're gonna hear me say I a lot, there was other people involved in this. Main thing, most of the time, it was my grandpa and I working on it. Both my brothers were involved with it. Doug at the very end helping to paint it. Dale, Massimo upholstery, all this stuff. But I took a sheet metal shaping class in Kentucky at Kingdom Metalworks. I was working on this fender, and there were some areas on it that I was struggling with, some areas that I had to make panels with. This fender in particular was really rough, and we just couldn't find a 35 right rear fender. We packaged this thing up, built a really nice plywood box for it, shipped it all the way to Kentucky. I get there in Kentucky, I didn't want to spend any money, so I fly in, I stayed the night in the airport, 5 or 6 hours, slept, kept going, got the rental car, drove to the place so I didn't have an extra night of a hotel and all this stuff. But I get to the place, not to bash yes, maybe it was I don't know, but I'm in the rental car to pick this thing up. I know that this box will fit in the back of this, whatever the heck it was. And this crate, it used to be this tall, is literally 4 inches tall. They set something on it and completely flattened this fender. I'm usually pretty level-headed, but I think this might have been the first time that I've lost my mind, because I didn't know what to do. This thing was just crushed, and we'd been hauling this thing around for years. Flew it all the way to Kentucky so I could work on it. And now it's flat and nobody can do anything about it. Obviously, it's flat. It's what it is. Gathered up the pieces, literally. Took it to the class with Kevin. It was a one-on-one class with a guy that used to build Cobras in the UK. I mean, he has lots of cool history and stories and lots of experience. So him and I, we didn't really focus on it a whole lot because it was honestly so damaged, but we did. We got started, if you will, pulling it back apart, but we were also like scared to send it back home and have something happen to it again. So it's like we didn't get too crazy, but I had a sense of pride for whatever reason that I wanted to fix that fender just because of what it had been through. So I fixed it. I completely pulled this fender back out. I shrunk what I had to shrink. I hand shaped basically this entire back corner. I hand shaped all that and welded it into this body. This front portion was a purchase panel that was installed too. I reshaped this whole area because it had just like some really terrible gas welding and stuff that had been done. So I just decided to make a new panel there and fixed it. I knew that if I did it, well, here I am telling this story and I'm excited about it. So that's what I was doing it. And I didn't want to have to buy a different one. I felt responsible for it because like it's my class and those freaking fenders flat. These are new running boards, but reproduction, they're really nice reproduction. And my grandpa wants to drive this car. It's got 2,500 miles on it. It's a couple years old. It's not a lot of miles, but for a hot rod show car, show and shine, whatever you want to call it, that's a lot of miles. So he wanted to be able to step on the running board and not be too worried about it versus doing painted. Other areas that were replaced, there again, just like the other side, was this lower portion of the quarter, the cowl side. This fender had some repairs too, but I think this was actually the best one. A lot of stuff had just been like overlapped and welded on. It was just, you could have mudded over this stuff, but I wasn't having it. Not a 10 out of 10, like fit and finish and paint, but just a nice, respectable car that I still get excited to see. And it's always fun to revisit this stuff years down the road. Both the front and rear bumpers have been moved in slightly closer to the body, just for a little cleanliness. Other than that, the front end of the car is pretty stock. It's even got the dog on it, which I think is just perfect for this car. Like, right when COVID hit, Denny shut down the shop. So I went home, of course, and painted this car. During that time, I was like, okay, I got a couple months here. I'm going to block this thing out and shoot it. So I painted everything that is blue then, and then the fenders were actually finished at the shop after I took it over. So there's a little bit of things to finish up, but I was able to get the bulk of that stuff done. I was just kind of starting to experiment with doing flat clear coat. So the firewall, it's probably dirty under here, but the firewall, it's the same body color, but it's got the flat clear on it. I say this all the time. It's like just a nice contrast from the inside to the outside with the same body color. And we still do a lot of that today. Look at that, it's even got headers. Added like 2 horsepower to the Flathead. Now you can make it up all the hills. Make it
Not just some of them.
Not just some, yeah. You can actually get to the top. The gearing's just right in this. It's not a high horsepower car, but you can drive it anywhere you need to go. So and actually it's been running good. It's been staying cool, and yeah, it's perfect. My grandpa just had Dale. He's a really old school hot rodder, just a cool guy. He just put a Edelbrock carburetor on it, which livened it up a little bit actually, but still able to use all the stock linkage and everything. Way better than the little tiny thing that was on there before. There's some kind of fun stuff on the interior too. These hoods are really tricky. The way they kind of like hook over this cowl side, and you got to get both latches right. Kind of one of those things you got to know how to use it. Which I hate saying that, but like the interior is really cool too. It's all colors my grandpa and Connie had picked out. Yeah, Massimo did a great job on all that. Massimo kind of designed really most of it, but just subtle and super clean. John Byers did all this wood graining. If you guys know Byers, all of his work's exceptional. And he did this himself all by hand. We just bodyworked all the pieces, and my grandpa brought them down there, and it's just such a elegant looking touch on the interior of this. So much better than just painting it. So that's a super cool look. Please comment, because I'm probably going to screw this up. I'm not very good at models and years. What was available? What were the options? I don't do it. So, but bear with me. This was a deluxe 35 Ford with the waterfall in the middle. And one thing that I think is really cool, this speaker. This whole piece was basically an add-on. It's from Ford, but it's a deluxe speaker. I believe this is Alcantara headliner. We don't have a grill on it, obviously, but the sound goes right through it. But it's just kind of like, it's cool to see. They were starting to inch towards radios and different things like that. And it's not something that I'd ever seen before. My grandpa found it. I'm glad he did. It's a pretty cool little touch. So we used a American Auto wire. I think it's a Highway 15 wiring harness in this, and Matt did all the install, did a really nice job on it. Went to this old boy's house when we were looking for parts, and he had this heater. I couldn't tell you what year it's out of, or it's a 30 something Ford, but it looks like it's supposed to be there. We put a little hideaway stereo in here, so it's got Bluetooth, AM, FM, all that stuff. USB chargers, like some of the little modern things, but like just keep it hidden, tucked away. I really want to go through, now that we have all the CNC stuff. Derek can machine knobs. You know, some of this stuff was we just had to work through it and just use what we had. But we could make some cool knobs now that like would match all this stuff. It'd be sweet. Classic instrument gauges. We did have to modify that a little bit, but just a nice classic looking gauge. Initially, we just had a Flame River, I did it, steering column that just would fit and worked with the Vega gear and everything, and worked at the angle that we liked with the tilt. And then after my grandpa was driving it a little while, it's just manual steering. So it's kind of hard to drive at slow speeds, and you're trying to do the clutch and everything all at the same time. And we had started using some of these, they're called the Micro Steer Flame River's electric power steering. They're so freaking cool. I totally am into it. You get rid of all the power steering, you get rid of all the hydraulic stuff. They're adjustable, based off of a knob. You can also put a speed sensor in the transmission and have the speed basically adjust the dampening, if you will, the assist that you get. We've been able to hide some of them a little bit better. This one's actually, when you're at Tyler's level right now, you can totally stare at the thing, but you don't even hardly notice this. It's just kind of tucked up under the dash. It clears everything with the pedals good, and this is it. There's a little control, like a little computer for it. Just totally changes the car, makes it so much more comfortable. The whole floor in this thing too, we're kind of talking more about metalwork. You can buy for these cars basically a front floor and tunnel. So floorboards means boards. So this would have had wood on the floor. It's all metal now, but you can buy the whole tunnel, which gets you a good start. You have to fabricate it and finish it yourself. But if you can see this little dish in the tunnel itself, I had to hammer and stretch that into the tunnel, and that, not so much stretch as just like invert it to give a little more room for the pedal, because the tunnel is bigger now with this transmission. A really common thing to do with that kit is what they call a small block firewall. A small block Chevy typically is what people were doing, and that changes this entire part of the firewall. But just with the Flathead, we were able to stick with the stock firewall. This is a stock seat. We moved it back a little bit, and I think we might have lowered it a little bit too. So it's pretty comfortable with the tilt column. It works good. It's kind of fun too, the way, well, it's got this whole package tray for like storage and stuff. To access the back, you can actually lift up the whole seat. And that's kind of how you get access to inside of here. Oh, look at that. Uncle D did some woodwork in here. Yeah. Derek built all this stuff. These little doors. So you can just like a little hidden storage spot. But just cool little thoughtful stuff they did. Useful, functional stuff they did. Yeah, it's all wood frame. I don't know. I don't think none of this is original. It's been rebuilt, but some pieces of it are. Yep. Thanks for watching this video. Please like, comment, subscribe. I've really tried to be super responsive and answer comments and questions that people have, and that's what cars are all about. So check out all of our descriptions and the links below. Stay tuned for more. I'm super excited, really excited about this car. So excited. It's a male dog, if you're wondering.
Cut to the...
Yeah, you could start just whacking it off like here.
Thanks for watching.
Okay.
Check out the website and links in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay. You got to say that now too.
So you say it like there's nothing to say. there's
three
all
things.
You have to do is hit 6 different things you need to talk about. Sarah always drops these little wisdom bombs on me. When we were initially talking about doing all this stuff, and I just don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can spend the time doing it. I just don't know if I want to do it. And she goes, but like no other hot rod shops in the area are doing this. And wouldn't you rather be the first? And I was like, oh, them guys, we're doing it right now. They can follow us.
Do they have the awooga horn? Or is it a normal horn?
No, I thought it did. He's a big awooga
horn
guy. That would...